I've always loved storms, the way they transform the sky, the electric anticipation in the air, the raw power that reminds humans of our microscopic place in the universe. As a meteorologist, I've spent my career chasing and studying them. The irony isn't lost on me now. The Manu weather station sits on a ridge overlooking the Peruvian rainforest, a lonely metal and concrete structure perched like an alien spacecraft amid the endless green canopy. It's the most advanced tropical weather monitoring facility in South America, and for the next 3 weeks, it was supposed to be my temporary home. You'll have the best view of TS-103 forming, Dr. Reyes had told me back in Lima. The data you collect could revolutionize our understanding of cyclone formation in changing climate conditions. I remember smiling at his enthusiasm. My predecessor, Emilio, had been evacuated with appendicitis 2 days earlier. The timing couldn't have been better for my research, a potential tropical storm forming just as I arrived to monitor it. The helicopter dropped me off yesterday morning. The pilot, a weathered man named Carlos, gestured at the darkening horizon as he unloaded my supplies. 3 weeks might become 4, he shouted over the rotors. That system is moving faster than predicted. I nodded, squinting at the distant cloud formation. I've studied the models. It'll pass north of here. Carlos gave me a look I now recognize as pity. Weather doesn't read models, Dr. Levin. The station is impressively equipped: satellite communications, radar systems, atmospheric sampling equipment, and enough supplies to last a month. It was built to withstand Category 4 hurricane conditions, though this region rarely sees anything beyond tropical storms. I spent my first day calibrating equipment and settling in. The sunset was spectacular, the clouds on the horizon painted in violent purples and reds. I took it as a gift rather than an omen. That night, I sent my final clear transmission to the Meteorological Center in Lima. TS-103 showing rapid intensification, barometric pressure dropping faster than models predicted, requesting updated satellite imagery. The response came 2 hours later. Reclassified as Tropical Cyclone Ernesto, projected path shifting, prepare for possible direct impact within 72 hours. Evacuation helicopter scheduled for tomorrow 0600. I stepped outside onto the small observation deck. The wind had already picked up, bringing with it the scent of rain and ozone. Far below, the rainforest canopy swayed like an ocean. In the distance, lightning illuminated the massive wall of clouds advancing toward me. I didn't sleep that night. I monitored the storm's progress, watching with professional fascination as it defied all models, intensifying and shifting course directly toward my position. By morning, the wind was howling around the station, and sheets of rain reduced visibility to mere yards. My satellite phone rang at 5:30 a.m. Dr. Levin. It was Carlos, his voice barely audible over the static. Evacuation impossible. Wind speed exceeds safety parameters. Station designed to withstand. The line went dead. I stood by the window, watching as the anemometer recorded wind speeds climbing past 100 mph. The metal frame of the station groaned around me. On my screens, I could see the perfect spiral of Cyclone Ernesto, its eye moving inexorably toward my position. For the first time, I understood that I wasn't just observing the storm, I was trapped inside it. The transition happened faster than I could process. One moment I was staring at radar images, the next I was on the floor as something massive slammed into the station's roof. A section of metal paneling tore away, exposing ceiling insulation that immediately began to darken with rain. The station's emergency protocols activated automatically. Metal shutters slid over the windows with a series of mechanical thuds. The main power cut out, plunging me into darkness for 3 terrifying seconds before the backup generators hummed to life, casting everything in dim, red emergency lighting. The wind screamed like a living thing. I crawled to the communications console, desperate to establish contact with Lima. The satellite link was down. Of course it was. The dish on the roof was probably gone. The radio crackled with nothing but static. "This is Dr. Julia Levin at Manu Station. Does anyone copy?" I repeated the call every 15 minutes for the next 2 hours, receiving nothing but the storm's electric howl in response. Something fundamental in my brain chemistry shifted during those hours. The rational, analytical scientist gave way to something more primal. I found myself crouched in the corner of the control room, back pressed against concrete, counting seconds between thunderclaps to calm my racing heart. Then, suddenly, silence. The abrupt absence of noise was so disorienting, I thought I'd gone deaf. I uncurled from my position and approached the control panel. The barometric pressure reading confirmed what I already knew. The eye of the cyclone had reached me. Against all safety protocols, I overrode the emergency shutters. They retracted with painful slowness, revealing a world transformed. The sky above was a perfect circle of surreal, peaceful blue, surrounded by a wall of churning black clouds that reached to the heavens. Half the observation deck had been torn away. Where there had been dense rainforest yesterday, there was now a landscape of broken trees, their trunks snapped like matchsticks, all pointing in the same direction. I knew I had perhaps 30 minutes before the back wall of the eye arrived, bringing winds potentially even stronger than before. I needed to assess the damage and secure anything that could become a projectile. The satellite dish hung precariously from a single mount. The anemometer was gone entirely. A quick survey revealed that the eastern wall of my living quarters had partially collapsed, allowing rain to soak my bed and personal belongings. I worked methodically, moving essential supplies to the core of the station, the reinforced concrete control room. I filled every container I could find with water, knowing the station's pumping system might fail. I gathered the emergency medical kit, my laptop, all available batteries, and non-perishable food. As I worked, I noticed a wetness on my arm that wasn't rain. A gash ran from elbow to wrist, likely from flying debris I hadn't even felt in my adrenaline-soaked state. I cleaned and bandaged it hastily, aware of the precious minutes ticking away. The wind began to pick up again. I looked at the wall of clouds approaching from the west and hurried back inside, sealing the shutters just as the first violent gusts hit. The second half of the cyclone was worse. Much worse. Something in the station's structure had been compromised during the first impact. Now, with the winds coming from the opposite direction, the building shuddered with each gust. Metal screeched against metal. The concrete floor beneath me vibrated continuously. Water began seeping in from multiple points. Not just rain. The creek that supplied the station had overflowed, sending a torrent of muddy water across the foundation. I watched in helpless horror as it rose inch by inch in the lower sections of the station. The backup generator sputtered and died around midnight, plunging me into absolute darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight, its beam pathetically small against the encompassing blackness. In that moment, I understood with perfect clarity that I might die here. Not as a scientist studying a natural phenomenon, but as its victim. The realization wasn't dramatic, just a cold, simple fact settling into my consciousness. I curled up on top of the highest surface I could find, a desk bolted to the floor in the control room, and waited, listening to the storm, dismantling my temporary home, piece by piece. Dawn arrived with a diffuse grey light, filtering through cracks in the station's structure. The wind had subsided to merely strong gusts, rather than the apocalyptic force of the night before. Rain still fell steadily, but the worst had passed. I uncurled my stiff body from the desk where I'd spent the night. Everything hurt. My cut arm had bled through its bandage, and new bruises decorated my legs and torso. I hadn't even noticed receiving them. The station was unrecognizable. Water stood ankle-deep throughout the lower sections. Ceiling panels hung like broken wings. Equipment lay scattered and destroyed. The eastern section, including my sleeping quarters, had collapsed entirely, leaving that area open to the elements. My first coherent thought was to check the communication systems. The main console was dead, soaked through with rainwater. The satellite phone was missing, likely swept away. The emergency radio, stored in a waterproof case, was intact but useless without power. I stood in the wreckage, fighting rising panic. Basic training kicked in. Assess, prioritize, act, as Dr. Reyes always said. First priority, determine if the structure was stable enough to remain in. A careful inspection revealed that while the eastern section was gone, the central control room and western storage areas remained structurally sound, despite leaks and water damage. Second priority, clean water. The station's filtration system was offline with the power, but I found several untouched gallons of bottled water in the storage room, enough for perhaps a week with careful rationing. Third priority, take stock of food. This revealed my first serious problem. The main food stores had been kept in cabinets that were now submerged in muddy water. Many sealed packages remained salvageable, but I estimated only enough for 8 to 10 days of minimal sustenance. Fourth priority, power. The main generator was completely destroyed. The backup was waterlogged, but might be salvageable if I could dry it out. There was also a small solar charging panel for emergency equipment that had survived, still in its case. I worked methodically through the day, creating a habitable space in what remained of the control room. I hung tarps to seal off damaged sections and diverted water away from my makeshift living area. I laid out soaked electronics in hopes they might dry enough to function. As I worked, I tried to maintain my scientific detachment, cataloguing observations about the storm's impact. Wind direction, evidenced by debris patterns. Rainfall totals indicated by watermarks. Maximum wind speed suggested by structural damage. But as the day wore on, my professional facade cracked. I found myself standing in what had been my sleeping quarters, now open to the sky, holding the soaked remains of the framed photo of my sister's family that I'd placed on the nightstand just yesterday. The glass was shattered, the image bleeding away in watercolors. Something about this specific loss, tiny compared to everything else, broke through my shock. I sank to my knees in the mud and debris and sobbed until my throat hurt, the ruined photograph clutched against my chest. Night fell quickly, as it always does in the tropics. I'd managed to get the solar charger working enough to power my flashlight, but I used it sparingly, sitting instead in the darkness, listening to the continuing rain and the unfamiliar sounds of the forest below. The station was built on a ridge precisely to maintain separation from the rainforest and its inhabitants. Now, with walls collapsed and windows gone, that separation had vanished. I heard movements in the darkness, rustling, chittering, the occasional crash as weakened branches succumbed to gravity. In the beam of my flashlight, I spotted a column of leaf-cutter ants already establishing a highway across what had been the station floor. A tree frog clung to the remains of a wall, its eyes reflecting the light like alien orbs. The forest was already reclaiming this human intrusion. I tried to calculate when help would come. The protocol was clear. If communication was lost during a severe weather event, a rescue team would be dispatched as soon as conditions permitted safe travel. But the cyclone had affected a vast area. Resources would be stretched thin. Priority would go to populated areas, not to a single scientist on a remote ridge. Realistically, I might need to survive here for weeks. As I drifted into an exhausted sleep, I remembered Carlos's parting words with painful clarity. Weather doesn't read models, Dr. Levin. Neither, it seemed, did fate. Day 3 after the cyclone, and rain still fell intermittently. I established a routine of sorts, providing structure to combat the creeping anxiety. Morning, check for structural changes or new leaks. Assess water collection systems I'd rigged from tarps and containers. 1 protein bar, half of my daily food ration. Midday, work on repairs and salvage operations. Attempt to dry and fix equipment. Scout the immediate surroundings of the station for useful materials or food sources. Evening, filter collected rainwater, organize supplies, second half of daily ration. Maintain a journal of observations and experiences on my laptop while its battery lasted. The inventory of my situation was sobering. Food, 18 protein bars, 7 packages of dehydrated meals, requiring hot water I couldn't yet provide, 3 cans of beans, 5 packages of crackers, and an assortment of condiment packets. Perhaps 2 weeks of survival rations if strictly controlled. Water, 6 gallons of bottled water plus what I could collect from rainfall. Currently sufficient but dependent on continued precipitation. Shelter. The remaining structure was stable but compromised. Every rainfall revealed new leaks. The nights were cold without power for heating, and the days sweltering once the sun emerged. Tools, a basic toolkit for station maintenance. A Swiss Army knife I'd had in my pocket during the storm. No proper cutting tools for gathering materials from the forest. Communication. All systems remained non-functional. The emergency radio might work if I could power it, but the antenna was damaged. Medical supplies. A well-stocked first aid kit, thankfully. My arm was showing signs of infection, despite careful cleaning. I started a course of antibiotics from the kit, aware that they were a finite resource. On the 4th day, I ventured beyond the immediate perimeter of the station for the first time. The landscape was transformed beyond recognition. Where there had been an orderly path leading to the helicopter pad, there was now a jumble of fallen trees and debris. The pad itself was gone entirely, likely carried away by the same mudslide that had taken the eastern section of the station. The forest below had been shredded by the wind, creating a chaotic tangle of broken trees and exposed undergrowth. Navigation would be nearly impossible without cutting tools. Still, I needed to explore. Food would become a critical issue soon. I made my way carefully down the ridge, marking my path with strips of bright yellow caution tape from the station's emergency kit. The going was treacherous. Mud gave way underfoot, and shattered trees created unstable piles of debris that shifted with each step. After an hour of careful descent, I reached what remained of the small creek that supplied the station's water. It had transformed into a raging torrent during the storm, carving a new, wider channel through the forest. Along its banks, I found my first potential food source, clusters of heart of palm trees, many damaged but still standing. I harvested what I could reach with my Swiss Army knife, the work slow and awkward, without proper tools. By late afternoon, I had collected several pounds of the tender inner cores, not particularly calorie-dense, but edible raw, and a welcome change from protein bars. On my climb back to the station, I made a discovery that sent a surge of hope through me. Caught in a tangle of branches about halfway up the ridge was a large metal case, its yellow surface unmistakable. The station's emergency survival kit, torn from its mounting during the storm. It took me an hour of careful maneuvering to free it from the debris, without sending it tumbling down the slope. The case was dented but intact, its waterproof seal uncompromised. Inside was a treasure trove, a proper machete, water purification tablets, a compact cooking stove with fuel, emergency rations, fishing line and hooks, a more powerful emergency radio, flares, and a comprehensive first aid kit. I sat beside the case and wept with relief. These tools dramatically improved my chances of survival until rescue came. That night, I cooked my first hot meal since the storm, a simple combination of heart of palm and one of the dehydrated meal packets. The normality of hot food brought a comfort I hadn't expected, a small reminder of the civilized world that seemed increasingly distant. As I ate, I tried the emergency radio, scanning frequencies and repeating my distress call. "This is Dr. Julia Levin at Manu Weather Station severely damaged by Cyclone Ernesto, requesting immediate assistance." Only static answered me. I wasn't particularly surprised. The radio's range was limited, and the nearest outpost was over 100 kilometers away. The same storm that had devastated my station had likely affected communications throughout the region. That night in my journal, I wrote, Day 4. Found emergency kit. Improved situation significantly. Still no contact. Arm infection, responding to antibiotics. Established food supplementation strategy. Psychological state stable, but experiencing periods of acute anxiety regarding rescue timeline. Weather pattern suggests continued rainfall for foreseeable future. Will attempt to improve shelter tomorrow and establish more permanent systems for water collection and food procurement. Note: observed unusual animal behavior today. Multiple species, normally not seen together, gathering near the creek. Possible displacement due to storm damage in their habitats. Should monitor for potential new predators in area. I fell asleep to the sound of rain resuming its percussion on what remained of the station roof, clutching the radio like a talisman. By the end of the second week, I'd settled into a sustainable routine. The emergency kit had transformed my situation from desperate to merely challenging. My shelter had improved considerably. I'd used the machete to cut supportive poles from fallen trees, reinforcing the damaged sections of the station. Tarps and salvaged material created waterproof sections where I could sleep and store supplies without constant dampness. The solar charger worked well enough on sunny days to power the emergency radio for brief transmissions and occasionally charge my laptop. I maintained a daily schedule of distress calls, though I'd heard nothing but distant, unintelligible fragments of communication. Food remained my greatest concern. The emergency rations, combined with my salvage supplies, gave me a baseline of calories, but not enough for sustained energy. I supplemented with heart of palm, various edible plants I could identify with certainty from my limited knowledge of tropical botany, and occasionally grubs and insects when desperate enough to overcome my revulsion. My most significant success came from the creek. Using fishing line from the emergency kit, I'd managed to catch several small fish. The first time I felt the tug on my makeshift rod, a flexible branch with line attached, the surge of triumph was almost embarrassing in its intensity. Water was plentiful thanks to continued rainfall, which I collected in a system of tarps and containers, then purified with tablets from the kit. On sunny days, I experimented with solar disinfection, leaving bottles of water in direct sunlight for hours. My body was changing. I'd lost weight. How much was impossible to know without a scale, but my clothes hung looser. My previously soft hands had developed calluses from daily work with the machete. My skin had darkened from constant exposure, despite my attempts to stay covered. The cut on my arm had finally healed, leaving an angry red scar. Other injuries accumulated, small cuts, persistent fungi between my toes, despite rigorous drying, a collection of insect bites that itched maddeningly. The psychological challenges proved more difficult than the physical ones. Isolation pressed on me like a physical weight. I talked to myself constantly, sometimes carrying on entire conversations with colleagues back in Lima or my sister in Boston. I sang aloud while working, my voice echoing strangely in the damaged station. At night, the sounds of the rainforest intensified my sense of solitude. Howler monkeys called to each other with their otherworldly cries. Insects created a constant symphony of clicks and whirs. Occasional crashes in the underbrush startled me from sleep, my heart racing as I imagined jaguars or other predators investigating my shelter. I began to measure time differently. Rather than days of the week, I counted days since the cyclone. Rather than hours, I tracked the sun's position. My phone's clock still functioned, but the numbers seemed increasingly arbitrary, disconnected from my new reality. On day 15, I experienced my first genuine moment of despair. It began with rain, not the now familiar afternoon showers, but a deluge that continued through the night and into the next day. The creek swelled again, threatening to flood my lower collection areas. Wind drove water through every tiny gap in my shelter. I huddled in the driest corner, wrapped in a space blanket from the emergency kit, shivering despite the tropical heat. For the first time, I genuinely questioned whether rescue would come at all. Perhaps the cyclone had caused such widespread devastation that the remote weather station and its lone scientist had been forgotten. Perhaps they assumed I was dead. As these thoughts circled, I found myself staring at the remaining antibiotics in the medical kit. There were enough pills there to end things if it came to that. The thought wasn't active suicidal ideation, more a cataloguing of options, a scientist's need to understand all variables. The moment passed with the storm. As sunlight broke through the clouds the following morning, I forced myself back into my routine. I repaired storm damage, checked my fishing lines, and made my daily radio call with deliberate professionalism. That afternoon, I caught the largest fish yet, some kind of catfish almost as long as my forearm. As I prepared it for cooking, carefully following the technique I'd read about in a wilderness survival book years ago, I felt a renewed determination. I wasn't just surviving, I was adapting. Each day brought new knowledge: which plants grew back fastest after rain, how to move through the broken forest more efficiently, how to preserve food by smoking it over a small fire. In my journal that night, I wrote, Day 16. Major storm system passed. No significant structural damage to my improved shelter. Successful fishing expedition. Protein intake improved. Radio transmissions continue without response. Physical condition stable, though continued weight loss concerning. Psychological state improved after temporary low point. Note: observed multiple helicopter contrails far to the south today. First evidence of potential recovery operations in the region. Must improve visibility of station from air. Will construct signal markers tomorrow. The next morning, I began gathering materials for signal flags, bright pieces of equipment casing and tarp that I could arrange in the clearing near the station. As I worked, I hummed a song my sister and I had loved as children, the familiar melody a thread connecting me to a world that seemed increasingly distant. For the first time in days, I felt something like hope. Day 23 brought an unexpected development that shattered my fragile equilibrium. I was returning from the creek with my meager fishing haul when I noticed something unusual near my shelter, a splash of color that didn't belong. I approached cautiously, machete ready. It was a backpack, not mine, a red nylon hiking pack, propped deliberately against what remained of the station's exterior wall. I froze, scanning the surroundings. Hello? My voice sounded strange, the first word I'd spoken aloud to another human in over 3 weeks. Is someone there? No response. I approached the pack carefully, half expecting a trap, though the rational part of my brain dismissed this as paranoia. Who would set a trap here, and why? The pack contained basic supplies: a water bottle, some energy bars, a first aid kit, a flashlight, and a note written on waterproof paper. Dr. Levin, if you're alive, helicopter rescue impossible due to continuing landslide risk on ridge. Team attempting ground approach from eastern sector. This pack left by advance scout. Stay at station. Signal fire at night if possible. Estimated arrival of main team 4 and 7 days depending on conditions. Rescue coordination. Lima. I read the note 5 times, emotions cycling between elation, disbelief, and suspicion. Why hadn't the scout waited? How had they approached without me hearing them? The station was still the highest point in the immediate area. I should have seen anyone coming up the ridge. I searched the perimeter, finding a set of boot prints leading away to the south, not the direction I'd expected rescue to come from. They disappeared into the tangle of storm-damaged forest. That night, I built a signal fire as instructed, using the driest wood I could find and adding green leaves to create smoke visible from a distance. I stayed awake all night, feeding the fire and scanning the darkness for lights or movement. Nothing appeared. The next day, I found myself second-guessing everything. If rescue was really coming, should I remain at the station as instructed or try to move toward them? The note mentioned the eastern sector, but the footprints led south. Was this a genuine rescue effort or something else entirely? My isolation had made me paranoid, I realized. The simplest explanation was that a scout had indeed reached the station while I was fishing, left supplies, and continued on their mission. The main rescue team would arrive within a week. I decided to maintain my routine, but prepare for evacuation. I organized my few valuable possessions, my journal, the data hard drives that had survived the storm, my identification documents. I improved the signal fire location and gathered enough fuel for several nights. On day 25, I woke to the sound of movement outside my shelter. Heart pounding, I grabbed the machete and moved to the entrance. In the grey pre-dawn light, I saw a figure crouched by my water collection system. "Stop right there," I called, trying to sound authoritative despite my fear. The figure straightened and turned slowly. A man, bearded, weathered, dressed in stained khaki clothing, not in any kind of uniform or rescue gear. "Dr. Levin," he said. Not a question. "Who are you?" I kept the machete visible. "Emilio Vega." He held his hands out, showing they were empty. "I was stationed here before you." I remembered the name, my predecessor, evacuated for appendicitis just before I arrived, but something felt wrong. "Prove it," I said. A faint smile. "The emergency kit is stored in a yellow case mounted beside the generator housing. The satellite uplink requires recalibration after heavy rainfall. The third drawer in the control room contains a bottle of rum hidden behind the equipment manuals." These details were specific enough to be convincing. I lowered the machete slightly. "What are you doing here? Where's the rescue team?" Emilio's expression darkened. "There is no team, Doctor. Not yet. The cyclone hit a much wider area than anticipated. Lima, Cusco, major damage. Rural areas are low priority." "But the note—" "I left it. Thought it might help your morale until I could explain." He gestured at my shelter. "May I sit? It's been a long journey." I hesitated, then nodded. We sat across from each other in my makeshift living area, the machete still within my reach. Emilio explained that he'd been in a small research outpost about 40 kilometers south when the cyclone hit. Their facilities were damaged but not destroyed. When no evacuation came, he and another researcher decided to check on neighboring stations. The other man headed north. Emilio came to Manu. "I didn't expect to find anyone alive," he admitted, accepting the cup of rainwater I offered. The satellite images we managed to access showed catastrophic damage in this sector. "How bad is it elsewhere?" I asked. "Bad. Infrastructure destroyed across 4 provinces. Hundreds dead, thousands displaced. International aid is coming, but slowly." He studied me. "You've done well, all things considered. Most people wouldn't have survived this long." "When will help come?" He looked away. "Hard to say, maybe weeks. The roads are gone, mudslides. Air rescue is focused on populated areas." We sat in silence as I absorbed this, my brief flare of hope guttered. "We have options," Emilio finally said. "We can stay here, improve the shelter, pool our resources. Or we can try to make it to my outpost. It's a difficult journey through damaged forest, but there are 4 people there, more supplies." I considered this. Staying meant continued isolation, but a greater chance of eventual aerial rescue. Traveling meant hazardous conditions, but more immediate human contact and better resources. "I need time to think," I said. Emilio nodded. "Of course, I'll help with your tasks today. We can decide tomorrow." Having another human present transformed my experience. We worked together to improve the water collection system, check fishing lines, and gather edible plants. Emilio knew the forest far better than I did, pointing out fruits and tubers I hadn't recognized as food sources. That night, we sat by a small fire, sharing the fish we'd caught and the last of my emergency rations. Emilio told me about his background. Born in Lima, trained in meteorology in Mexico, specialized in tropical weather systems. He asked about my research, my experiences during the cyclone. It was the first real conversation I'd had in nearly a month. The simple act of exchanging words with another person felt miraculous. Yet something nagged at me. Small inconsistencies in his story. The way he sometimes paused before answering questions about the station. His knowledge of the forest seemed deeper than would be expected for a meteorologist. As we prepared for sleep, Emilio in a makeshift bed on the opposite side of the shelter, I made sure the machete remained within my reach. Trust, I was learning, had become as precious a resource as food or clean water. I woke before dawn, the sky still dark. Emilio's sleeping form was visible across the shelter, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of deep sleep. Moving silently, I slipped outside with my journal and the solar-charged flashlight. I needed to think clearly, away from his presence. I had recorded my daily observations faithfully since the cyclone. Now I reviewed them, looking for any mention of appendicitis, evacuation protocols, or details about my predecessor that might help verify Emilio's identity. There was little to go on. The official briefing had mentioned Emilio Vega only in passing. A routine staff rotation interrupted by medical emergency. I had no way to confirm his appearance or background. More troubling were the inconsistencies I'd noticed. He'd mentioned specific details about the station's layout and equipment, but had hesitated when I asked about the calibration sequence for the barometric sensors, something any meteorologist stationed here would know intimately. His knowledge of edible plants and navigation seemed more consistent with a local guide than a scientist. When speaking of the cyclone's impact, he provided general information, but few verifiable specifics about government response or affected areas. As dawn broke, I reached a decision. I would neither fully trust nor openly challenge him. I would agree to travel to his outpost, but remain vigilant for any sign of deception. When Emilio woke, I told him I'd decided to accompany him. "Good choice," he said, his relief seeming genuine. "We should leave tomorrow morning. Today we'll prepare. You'll need better footwear for the journey." We spent the day in focused preparation. Emilio helped me fashion crude but functional hiking boots from the rubber matting that had lined the station floor, secured with cord from the emergency kit. We packed only essentials: water purification tablets, the remaining food, first aid supplies, my journal, and the machete. "The journey will take 4 to 5 days, Emilio explained as we worked. "The terrain is challenging. The storm brought down many trees, and there are new streams and mudslides to navigate around." That night, as we ate our final meal at the station, I asked him directly about his background. "You seem to know a lot about forest survival for a meteorologist." He paused, then smiled slightly. "My father was indigenous, Shipibo. I grew up in Lima but spent summers with his family near Pucallpa. You learn these things when you're young." He gestured at the makeshift boots we'd created. "Science was my way out of poverty, but those early lessons stay with you." The explanation made sense. Still, I kept the machete close as I slept. We left at first light, the rising sun painting the devastated landscape in deceptively beautiful hues of gold and green. I took a final look at the station, my home and prison for nearly a month. Despite everything, leaving felt strangely like abandonment. The journey proved even more difficult than Emilio had suggested. The cyclone had completely transformed the terrain. What had once been distinct ridgelines and valleys was now a chaotic jumble of debris, fallen trees, and newly formed waterways. Emilio led confidently, choosing paths I wouldn't have seen and identifying landmarks that meant nothing to me. We moved slowly, sometimes covering less than a kilometer in an hour as we navigated around impassable areas or cut through tangles of vegetation. By midday, I was exhausted, my muscles burning from the unfamiliar exertion. My improved but still inadequate footwear had rubbed blisters on both heels. When we stopped to rest and filter water from a stream, I noticed Emilio watching me with concern. "You're not used to this kind of movement," he observed. "I'm fine," I insisted, though we both knew I was struggling. He nodded, not challenging my pride. "We'll make camp earlier today. Better to preserve strength than push too hard." As we continued, I began to notice signs of the cyclone's impact beyond physical destruction. Animal behavior seemed altered. Species normally separate were clustered in undamaged patches of forest. We passed the decomposing carcasses of monkeys and birds, likely victims of exposure or starvation after their habitats were destroyed. Late afternoon brought us to a relatively flat area beside a small waterfall. A new formation created when the cyclone redirected a stream over a cliff edge. Emilio declared it our campsite for the night. As he gathered firewood, I removed my makeshift boots to examine my blistered feet. The skin was raw and weeping in places. I applied antibiotic ointment from the first aid kit and wrapped them in strips of clean cloth. "May I?" Emilio asked, gesturing to my feet when he returned. I hesitated, then nodded. He examined my bandaging job with a critical eye. "Not bad, but it won't last through tomorrow's walking." From his pack, he produced leaves I didn't recognize. "Chew these until they're paste, then apply to the blisters. They'll reduce inflammation and toughen the skin." I looked at the leaves skeptically. "It's not magic, it's chemistry," he said, correctly reading my expression. "The plant contains compounds similar to aspirin, plus natural antibacterials." I followed his instructions. The paste tasted intensely bitter, but provided almost immediate relief when applied to my raw skin. That night by the fire, eating a meager meal of dried fish and wild tubers Emilio had gathered, I found myself studying him. His movements were efficient, his awareness of our surroundings constant. He seemed completely at home in this devastated environment. "Tell me about your outpost," I said. "The people there." "Small research team, 2 other scientists, botanists studying climate change effects on rainforest species, 1 local guide." He poked at the fire. "Basic facilities, solar power, radio communication that was working intermittently when I left." "And they're expecting you back?" His eyes met mine, something unreadable in their depths. "Yes, though not necessarily with company." We lapsed into silence. The forest around us came alive with night sounds, insects, frogs, the occasional cry of a night bird. Above, through gaps in the canopy, stars appeared in a sky washed clean by recent rain. Despite my suspicions, I felt a profound sense of relief at not being alone. The human need for connection ran deeper than fear or doubt. As I drifted towards sleep, I heard Emilio speaking softly in what I assumed was a Shipibo dialect, perhaps a prayer, or simply talking to himself. The gentle cadence of the unfamiliar language followed me into dreams. Tomorrow would bring us closer to either safety or whatever truth lay behind Emilio's appearance. As sleep claimed me, I realized I had made my choice when I left the station. There was no path now but forward. On the 4th day of our journey, everything changed. We had been making steady progress despite the challenging terrain. My feet, treated nightly with Emilio's herbal remedy, had toughened enough to make walking bearable. I was learning to move through the forest more efficiently, mimicking Emilio's careful placement of feet and distribution of weight. The landscape was beginning to shift subtly. Fewer fallen trees, more intact sections of canopy. Evidence of the cyclone's fury remained, but its intensity had clearly diminished in this region. We paused at midday, beside a small, clear pool fed by a spring. As I refilled our water containers, Emilio scanned the surrounding forest with unusual intensity. "We're being followed," he said quietly. My heart rate spiked. "What? By whom?" "Not sure. Noticed signs yesterday. Broken vegetation that wasn't from animals. A campsite not properly concealed." He kept his voice low. Could be displaced locals, could be something else. Something else? Emilio hesitated. Since the cyclone, there have been reports of opportunists, people taking advantage of the chaos, looting abandoned areas, intercepting aid shipments. Bandits? In the rainforest? Desperation makes people unpredictable. He shouldered his pack. We should keep moving. My outpost is less than a day away now. We continued at a faster pace, Emilio frequently pausing to check our back trail or alter our route in ways I didn't understand. The forest seemed identical in all directions to me, but he moved with absolute certainty. Late afternoon brought us to a ridge overlooking a small valley. In the distance, perhaps 3 kilometers away, I could see an unnatural shape, rectangular buildings partially visible through the canopy. Your outpost? I asked, hope rising. Emilio's expression was unreadable. Yes. As we prepared to descend the ridge, a sound stopped us both, the unmistakable mechanical rhythm of helicopter rotors. We looked up simultaneously, scanning the sky through breaks in the canopy. The sound grew louder, then a helicopter appeared, flying low over the forest about a kilometer to our west. Government rescue? I asked, already reaching for the emergency flare in my pack. Emilio's hand shot out, gripping my wrist. Wait. The helicopter was unmarked, no Red Cross, no official insignia visible on its dark green exterior. It circled once, then descended somewhere beyond our line of sight. That's not rescue, Emilio said, releasing my wrist. At least not the kind you're hoping for. What do you mean? Who are they? He hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. I haven't been entirely truthful with you, Dr. Levin. My hand moved instinctively toward the machete at my belt. I am Emilio Vega, he continued, but I wasn't stationed at Manu as a meteorologist. I was investigating illegal logging operations, using research outposts as cover. I stared at him, trying to process this revelation. I'm with the Environmental Protection Division of the Peruvian government, he explained. We'd received reports that certain weather and research stations were being used to coordinate illegal resource extraction in protected areas. The cyclone hit during my investigation. The outpost we're heading to? A base for a logging operation disguised as a research facility. The botanists I mentioned are actually spotters for valuable timber species. He gestured toward where the helicopter had disappeared. That's their transportation and supply line. I sat down heavily on a fallen log, my mind racing. So there's no rescue team coming, no other researchers. There is rescue happening, but it's focused on populated areas, as I said. These remote regions. He shrugged. Low priority. Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning? I wasn't sure if you were involved. Some legitimate scientists have been recruited to provide cover for these operations, willingly or unwittingly. His eyes met mine. I needed to observe you, see how you responded to certain questions. And now? Now I believe you're exactly what you appear to be, a meteorologist caught in a disaster. He looked toward the outpost. But we have a problem. That helicopter landing means increased activity. They're likely extracting valuable timber before government oversight returns to the region. So we avoid the outpost and keep moving, I said. Emilio shook his head. The nearest legitimate facility is over a week's journey from here, and we don't have supplies for that. More importantly, that outpost has communication equipment. We need to get word out about your situation and about their illegal operation. You want to approach a camp of criminals? I want to observe first, then decide. He checked the position of the sun, now low in the western sky. We'll make camp here tonight. Tomorrow we can get closer, assess their numbers and routine. As darkness fell, we made a minimal camp. No fire, cold rations, hushed voices. From our elevated position, we could see faint lights from the outpost in the distance. If they're loggers, why didn't they just abandon the operation after the cyclone? I asked. The storm created opportunity, Emilio explained. Government oversight collapsed. Protected species that would normally be inaccessible became available when sections of forest were damaged. They're harvesting trees worth thousands of dollars per cubic meter on the black market. I processed this information, recalibrating my understanding of our situation. We weren't heading toward safety, but toward danger. Yet the outpost represented our best chance for communication with the outside world. "What's the plan?" I finally asked. "Tomorrow we observe. If possible, I'll approach alone first. I've been establishing a cover as a local guide seeking work. They don't know my real identity." He looked at me seriously. "You'll need to remain hidden. As a foreign scientist, you'd raise too many questions." That night, sleep eluded me. Every sound in the darkness seemed threatening. The relative safety I'd felt with Emilio had been based on false assumptions. Now we were planning to spy on an illegal operation with unknown numbers of potentially dangerous people. Yet beneath my fear ran a current of something else: purpose. After weeks of mere survival, focused entirely on my own needs, I now faced a situation where my actions might have broader significance. Dawn found us moving carefully down the ridge, using the dense vegetation as cover. As we drew closer to the outpost, signs of human activity increased: cut paths, marker tape on trees, the distant sound of voices and machinery. From a concealed position, about 500 meters from the main buildings, we observed the operation. The outpost consisted of 3 structures: a main building with satellite equipment visible on its roof, a large storage shed, and what appeared to be sleeping quarters. A cleared area served as a helicopter landing pad. 6 men were visible, moving between buildings or working to load cut timber onto a truck. "Smaller operation than I expected," Emilio murmured. "The cyclone might have reduced their numbers." "What now?" "I'll circle around and approach from the access road. Maintain my cover story. You stay here and observe. If I'm not back by nightfall, make your way northeast. There's a legitimate research station about 60 kilometers in that direction." "That's at least 4 days' journey," I said. "I don't have enough supplies." "There's a marked trail once you reach the river. You'd have a good chance." He handed me his pack. "Take my remaining supplies. There's a detailed map inside." Before I could protest further, he was gone, moving silently through the undergrowth with a skill I couldn't hope to match. I settled in to wait, watching the outpost through gaps in the foliage. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith and began to descend. Activity at the camp continued. Men loading timber, checking equipment, moving between buildings. Mid-afternoon, I saw Emilio emerge from the forest along what appeared to be an access road. From my distance, I couldn't hear the exchange, but I saw him gesturing, then being led toward the main building by one of the men. He didn't reappear. As shadows lengthened, my anxiety grew. Had his cover been blown? Was he being interrogated, or worse? Should I attempt to help somehow, or follow his instructions to flee if he didn't return? The decision was made for me when, just before dusk, 3 men emerged from the main building and began moving purposefully into the forest, in my direction. One pointed toward the ridge where we had observed from earlier. They were armed with machetes and what looked like hunting rifles. They were searching for me. I retreated as quietly as possible, fighting panic. Emilio must have been discovered or forced to reveal my existence. Either way, I couldn't stay. Moving as silently as my limited skills allowed, I headed northeast as Emilio had instructed. Darkness fell quickly, making progress nearly impossible in the dense forest. I was forced to stop, finding shelter beneath the raised roots of a massive tree. There, in the absolute darkness of the rainforest night, I made my final entry in the weather-beaten journal that had been my companion through this ordeal. Day 30. Emilio compromised at Logger Outpost. Forced to flee. Limited supplies, long journey ahead. Northeast to legitimate research station per E's instructions. Uncertain if pursuers will continue search tomorrow. If this journal is found, and I am not. My name is Dr. Julia Levin, meteorologist from Lima Central University, stationed at Manu Weather Station when Cyclone Ernesto hit. The station was destroyed. I survived 26 days alone before meeting Emilio Vega, government investigator. Verify this. Illegal logging operation, active at coordinates, marked on attached map. To my sister Catherine in Boston, I thought of you every day. The last song I hummed was Yellow Submarine. Remember how we used to drive Mum crazy with it? I love you. I'm sorry. I closed the journal and secured it in the waterproof case from Emilio's pack. Whatever happened tomorrow, I had survived 30 days in one of the most challenging environments on Earth. I had adapted, learned, endured. As exhaustion pulled me towards sleep, I realized that the meteorologist who had arrived at Manu Station a month ago no longer existed. That woman, with her academic concerns, her city sensibilities, her disconnect from the natural world, had been washed away by the cyclone. In her place was someone new, someone who understood viscerally that weather wasn't just data points on a chart, but a living force that shaped landscapes and lives. Someone who had experienced the raw power she had previously only studied. Dawn would bring new challenges. For now, I listened to the night sounds of the forest, no longer alien and threatening, but familiar, even comforting in their constancy. The